Most people fear being alone. They fill every silence with noise, every pause with a scroll, every quiet moment with something, anything, to escape the weight of solitude. But what if solitude isn't a curse at all? What if it's your sharpest spiritual weapon, the one thing that can pierce through the illusions of who you think you are and show you who you truly are beneath it all? Carl Jung believed that solitude isn't just peace and quiet, it's confrontation. It's standing face to face with the stranger that lives inside you. Because beneath all the personas you perform for the world, there's something deeper, something real, but it doesn't reveal itself in crowds. It emerges only when the noise dies down. There's a reason why so many people dread being alone. The mind doesn't like silence because silence is honest. It reflects everything back at you, the insecurities, the desires, the emptiness you've been trying to fill. Jung saw solitude as a sacred mirror, and most people break that mirror before they ever dare to look into it. But when you stay, when you let the discomfort unfold, you begin to notice something extraordinary. The chaos quiets, the false identities crumble, and something ancient, something truthful, begins to speak. This is where Jung's idea of individuation begins. It's not about becoming better, it's about becoming whole. And that journey starts when you stop trying to escape yourself. Solitude, then, becomes the fire through which you're tempered. Because when you're alone long enough, you can't pretend anymore. There's no audience to impress, no social role to hide behind. Just you, stripped down to essence. And that's terrifying, because we've all built our lives around avoiding that moment. But think about it. Every truly transformative figure in history, philosophers, prophets, artists, they all disappeared for a while. Jesus went into the desert. Buddha sat under a tree. Nietzsche walked alone in the Alps. Even Jung himself withdrew to a small tower by the lake, where he lived like a medieval monk, carving his visions into stone. Solitude wasn't their retreat, it was their laboratory. They didn't go there to escape the world. They went there to face the parts of themselves that the world made them forget. There's a paradox to solitude. At first it feels like isolation, but if you endure it, if you move past that first wall of restlessness, you begin to realize it's the opposite of isolation. It's connection, not with others, but with the timeless undercurrent of being itself. Jung called this the collective unconscious. It's the ocean beneath the waves of our individual minds. And solitude is how you dive deep enough to touch it. When you're alone long enough, patterns begin to emerge. You start seeing the symbols of your own psyche, dreams, images, sudden intuitions. Jung would call these archetypes, the ancient blueprints of the soul that whisper through myths and stories. They're not random, they're your psyche trying to guide you, showing you where you've strayed from your path. But most people never hear them because they never go quiet enough to listen. In solitude, you begin to notice that your thoughts have layers. There's the chatter, the surface mind that narrates everything. Then, beneath that, a quieter mind that simply observes. And deeper still, there's something wordless, something vast, like a presence watching from the shadows. Jung saw that presence as the self, not your ego, not your personality, but the totality of who you are. Solitude is how you make contact with it. You start to realize that all your striving, your success, your self-image, they're fragments orbiting around something infinitely larger. But solitude isn't passive. It's not just sitting in silence waiting for wisdom to drop into your lap. It's an active confrontation. Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And that's exactly what solitude demands, that you face the soul directly. No masks, no distractions, just raw, unfiltered existence. The reason solitude feels painful is because it dismantles illusions. It tears away every story you've told yourself about who you are and what you want. It's ego death in slow motion. And in that space, you begin to see how much of your life was built not out of truth, but out of fear. Fear of rejection, of insignificance, of facing the void within. But here's the thing, that void isn't empty. It's fertile. It's where the real you is born. When Jung retreated to his tower in Bollingen, he didn't bring books or theories. He carved stones. He built walls with his own hands. He cooked his own meals. He lived simply, rhythmically, like the ancients. And through that simplicity, something awakened in him. He said that in solitude, he found himself becoming the man he truly was, not the one society demanded him to be. That's the spiritual power of solitude. It strips away the external definitions and leaves only essence. But solitude isn't about rejecting people or society. Jung never advocated for isolation. He knew that after you find yourself in solitude, you must return. That's the alchemical cycle: separation, transformation, and reintegration. Solitude is the separation, the sacred fire that purifies the soul. Without it, you remain trapped in imitation, living through others' voices. But with it, you reclaim the inner authority that no one can give or take away. Let's be honest though, solitude is uncomfortable in the beginning. You might feel anxious, bored, even lost, because all the inner noise you've been suppressing suddenly surfaces. The mind throws tantrums like a child denied its toys. It'll tell you that you're wasting time, that you're missing out, that you should be doing something productive. But that's the ego panicking, because in solitude, it realizes it's no longer in control. And that's precisely why you must stay, because once the storm settles, clarity arrives. You begin to sense what Jung called the numinous, that feeling of sacredness that can't be explained, only experienced. You see, modern life trains us to fear silence. Everything is optimized for stimulation. Scroll, click, watch, repeat. But stimulation isn't nourishment, it's distraction. It keeps the soul starving while the senses feast. Solitude reverses that. It starves the senses so the soul can finally eat. That's why, after spending real time alone, you don't come back the same. The things that once fascinated you lose their grip. The noise of the world feels heavier, and your own voice, once buried, starts to sound clearer. Carl Jung believed that every person carries within them a potential for wholeness, but to realize it, you must descend into the depths. Solitude is that descent. It's the journey inward through the dark forest of the psyche, where your fears and shadows dwell. And those shadows, your anger, jealousy, shame, they aren't enemies, they're messengers. They carry the parts of you that were rejected, exiled, forgotten. In solitude, you finally have the courage to listen to them. And when you do, something shifts. You begin to see that what you feared most wasn't the darkness. It was your own power hidden within it. The more you integrate these lost fragments, the stronger you become. Not in a worldly sense, but spiritually. You stop chasing meaning outside yourself because you realize you were the source all along. And that's the moment solitude transforms from loneliness into liberation. Loneliness is when you crave someone else's presence. Solitude is when you discover your own. It's the difference between emptiness and fullness, between running from yourself and running toward yourself. And when you reach that place where being alone feels natural, you become untouchable. Not because you don't care, but because you've rooted yourself so deeply in being that no external validation can sway you. Solitude, then, is not just a tool, it's a weapon, a spiritual one. It cuts through illusion, exposes falsehood, and anchors you in truth. And once you've tasted that truth, the world can never seduce you in the same way again. But here's where most people stop. They taste a moment of stillness, maybe even a flicker of peace, and then rush back into the noise thinking they've done enough. Yet the true gift of solitude doesn't appear in those early moments of calm. It arrives after the silence starts to deepen, when your mind begins to unravel its own knots. Jung described this as a slow uncovering of the unconscious, like dust being blown off an ancient manuscript that's been sitting inside you for decades. You start to see things that were always there, but hidden. Your motives, your fears, the subtle ways you betray your own soul for comfort or approval. At first, it's unsettling because solitude doesn't flatter you, it reveals you. It's like turning on a bright light in a room you haven't cleaned in years. You see the mess, the neglected corners of your psyche. But what's remarkable is that once you stop judging it and start observing it, something begins to heal on its own. Jung often said that what you resist not only persists, it grows stronger. Solitude forces you to stop resisting. You can't distract yourself anymore. So the only option is acceptance. And that acceptance is where transformation begins. Imagine solitude as a forge. Every thought that rises is a piece of raw metal. Your desires, fears, hopes. You can't shape them when they're buried in the noise of everyday life. But in silence, with enough attention and patience, they start to melt down, to soften, and you can finally see their true form. That's what Jung meant when he spoke of making the unconscious conscious. It's not an abstract idea, it's the work of sitting with yourself until what was once unseen becomes seen. And the moment you see it clearly, it loses its power over you. This is why people who have truly embraced solitude often develop a kind of quiet strength. They don't need to shout to be heard or seek approval to feel real. They've already faced the inner storm, and once you've survived your own depths, the surface world loses its grip. You stop being reactive. You become deliberate. You move from being pulled by every emotional current to being anchored in your own presence. That's the hidden power Jung was pointing toward, the stability that comes from knowing yourself so deeply that nothing external can shake your foundation. But it's important to understand that solitude doesn't mean cutting off from the world. Jung wasn't promoting retreat forever. He believed in integration, that after solitude, you must return to life, to others, but as someone transformed. Solitude without return can lead to detachment or arrogance. Return without solitude leads to conformity. The real mastery lies in moving between the two, knowing how to withdraw and how to engage without losing yourself in either. In Jung's own life, this dance between solitude and society was constant. After his deep inner experiences during his so-called confrontation with the unconscious, he came back to his practice, to his family, to his students, but he was never the same man again. He didn't teach theories as much as he embodied them. You could feel it in his presence. And that's the ultimate point of spiritual solitude, not to escape life, but to return to it with eyes that truly see. Think of it this way. Most people live reacting to the surface of things. They don't see patterns. They see moments. They don't see causes. They see effects. But solitude teaches you to perceive the undercurrents. You start noticing how your moods change with the weather of your thoughts, how your relationships mirror your inner state. You realize that every frustration, every jealousy, every resentment is actually an inner message, a projection of something you haven't reconciled yet. Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves. Solitude gives you the space to see that truth play out in real time. And once that awareness dawns, even conflict transforms. You stop blaming and start inquiring. Why does this trigger me? What part of me is trying to speak through this discomfort? This is where solitude's power becomes unmistakable. It gives you sovereignty over your inner world. No one else can dictate your peace. You're no longer at the mercy of circumstance. because you've discovered that meaning and stability come from within, not from the chaos around you. But there's another layer to solitude that people rarely talk about. It's creative. Jung found that when you descend into silence long enough, symbols begin to emerge. They rise from the unconscious, like sparks from a fire. Images, dreams, intuitions. These aren't random. They're your psyche trying to communicate in its native language, metaphor. Jung painted them, wrote them, sometimes sculpted them, not because he wanted to be an artist, but because he knew the act of expression anchors the insight into reality. Solitude becomes the bridge between the invisible and the visible, between the spiritual and the tangible. That's why every great artist or thinker has periods of intense aloneness. They're not running away from the world, they're diving below it to bring something new back to the surface. When you learn to be alone, truly alone, creativity doesn't have to be forced. It begins to flow naturally, like water from an underground spring. And that's the paradox. You withdraw from the world only to return with something that enriches it. Yet solitude also humbles you, because as you go deeper, you realize how small you are compared to the vastness of existence. Jung wrote that the individual is like a leaf on the great tree of life. Unique, yes, but also inseparable from the whole. In solitude, this isn't just a concept, it's something you feel. The boundaries of ego soften. You start to sense that your thoughts, your struggles, your fears, they're not entirely yours. They're part of a shared human current flowing through time. And that realization, far from making you insignificant, connects you more deeply to everything. It's here that solitude becomes spiritual in the truest sense. Because spirituality isn't about escape or belief, it's about awareness. To be spiritual is to see clearly, and solitude clears the fog. It strips away the collective hypnosis of the world that tells you what to want, who to be, what success should look like. You start to measure value differently, not by attention, but by depth, not by appearance, but by authenticity. You become less concerned with being seen and more with seeing clearly. That's freedom, that's power. And maybe that's why solitude feels so dangerous to the modern mind. Because a person who's comfortable being alone can't be easily controlled. They're not dependent on approval or belonging to validate their existence. They can walk away from noise, from manipulation, from hollow promises. They have an inner compass that no one else can tamper with. That kind of person can't be sold illusions. They can't be convinced that meaning lies somewhere out there because they've found it within. But this inner freedom comes with a cost, the death of who you thought you were. Solitude asks you to surrender your masks, your roles, your borrowed identities. It's a kind of psychological crucifixion, the ego nailed to silence until it finally lets go. And in that surrender, something miraculous happens. The deeper self awakens, not the one made of words or thoughts, but the one made of presence. You don't have to find yourself anymore because you are yourself, fully, unapologetically, unfiltered. And when you reach that point, solitude stops feeling like something you do. It becomes a state of being. You could be in a crowded room and still feel alone in the best way possible, untangled, centered, at peace. Because solitude isn't about where you are, it's about where your awareness rests. And once you've found that still center, life no longer feels like a chase. It feels like a flow. And that's when solitude turns into something almost sacred. You start to feel like it's not just you sitting in silence, it's something larger, something eternal, sitting with you. The stillness becomes alive, almost intelligent. You realize that solitude was never empty. It was full the whole time, full of meaning, of whispers, of guidance that you couldn't hear over the noise of your own striving. Jung believed that the unconscious is not just a vault of memories. It's a living presence, a kind of inner companion that communicates in images and feelings rather than words. When you make peace with solitude, you make peace with that presence. This is why Jung often described the soul as something that needs attention, not analysis. Solitude gives it that attention. It's like visiting an old friend you've ignored for years. At first there's awkwardness, resentment maybe, but stay long enough, and the conversation becomes rich, intimate, alive. You begin to trust it again. You realize your intuition, that quiet knowing you used to dismiss, has been guiding you all along. Solitude reawakens that trust. It reattunes you to your inner compass. But solitude doesn't just change how you relate to yourself. It changes how you relate to everything. You start to see that most human suffering isn't born from pain itself, but from resistance to pain, from running, distracting, numbing, escaping. In solitude, you run out of places to hide. And oddly enough, that's when the pain starts to soften. When you stop fighting your sadness, it teaches you compassion. When you stop fearing your fear, it teaches you courage. When you stop judging your loneliness, it transforms into clarity. Every shadow turns into a teacher when you sit still long enough to listen. And perhaps that's what Jung meant when he said that people don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Solitude is how you do that. You descend into the darkness willingly. You light a candle instead of waiting for the sun. It's not glamorous, and it's not easy, but it's real. And that realness, unfiltered, unromanticized, is what gives solitude its spiritual power. Because once you've looked into your own abyss and survived, the world can't threaten you with emptiness anymore. You've already befriended it. In that space, even ordinary things start to shimmer differently. A cup of tea, the sound of wind, the texture of your breath, it all feels more alive. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You've slowed down enough to notice. Jung once said that modern man is sick because he's lost contact with the rhythms of life. Solitude restores that rhythm. It pulls you out of artificial time, the deadlines, the algorithms, the urgency, and drops you back into natural time, where everything unfolds at its own pace. The soul doesn't hurry, it grows. That's also why, after a period of deep solitude, your outer life often rearranges itself. People drift away, new paths open, old desires lose their hold. You start to see which connections were rooted in truth and which were built on fear. You stop chasing what drains you. You start protecting your energy like it's sacred because you finally understand that it is. Solitude teaches discernment. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. You can love people deeply without needing to lose yourself in them. You can engage with the world without being consumed by it. That's the balance Jung called individuation, the harmony between your inner and outer worlds. And when you reach that balance, you realize solitude and connection aren't opposites at all. They complete each other. Only the person who's comfortable being alone can love without clinging, give without depletion, and listen without ego. Because they're no longer looking to others to fill their emptiness. They're sharing from their fullness. Solitude transforms relationships from transactions into communion. You stop needing people to validate your existence. Instead, you start appreciating them for who they truly are, fellow travelers in the mystery of consciousness. But here's the quiet irony. The more time you spend in solitude, the more tender you become toward the world. You stop seeing humanity as lost or broken, and start seeing it as beautifully confused, just like you once were. Jung believed that the individual who heals themselves contributes invisibly to the healing of the collective. Every time you confront your shadow, Every time you dissolve an illusion, the entire web of consciousness brightens a little. That's why solitude isn't selfish, it's service. The peace you cultivate alone becomes a medicine for others, even if they never know where it came from. Still, solitude has a way of testing your devotion. There are moments when it feels barren, when nothing speaks back, when the silence turns heavy, and you question what you're even doing. But that's part of the discipline. Jung compared this to the alchemist's Negredo, the black stage of dissolution where everything familiar disintegrates before new life can form. The key is to endure it without running. Because if you can stay through the darkness, light emerges naturally, like dawn after a long night. Solitude is cyclical, not static. It has seasons, emptiness, reflection, insight, renewal. And each one is necessary. In those cycles, something subtle but powerful happens. You start to sense that the same intelligence moving through your thoughts is moving through the trees, the stars, the ocean. You're not isolated, you're immersed. The boundary between you and everything else starts to blur. That's what Jung hinted at with the self, the archetype of wholeness that transcends the personal ego. It's the moment you realize you're both the drop and the ocean, and in that realization, fear dissolves. What could you possibly lack when you are part of the totality? This is why solitude, when fully embraced, becomes a form of worship. Not the kind bound to temples or rituals, but a quiet reverence for existence itself. Every breath feels like a prayer, every moment sacred. You start to see that the spiritual path was never somewhere out there. It was always hidden in the simple act of being fully here, awake, aware, alone, and whole. By then, you no longer seek solitude as a retreat. It becomes your foundation. Even in noise, you carry silence. Even in chaos, you carry stillness. Even in a crowded world, you remain untouched at your core. And from that place, you can engage fully, create, love, lead, serve, without losing your center. That's the ultimate power Jung discovered. Solitude doesn't separate you from life. It sanctifies it. It turns ordinary existence into a dialogue with the divine. So, when you next find yourself alone, don't rush to fill the silence. Let it echo, let it stretch, let it swallow you whole for a while. Because buried inside that quiet is the one thing the world can never give you, yourself. And once you've met that self in solitude, you'll understand why Jung called it the greatest adventure a human being can take. You'll see that solitude isn't an escape from life, it's the beginning of it.